welcome to Forbidden Planet Talks To, and it's our pleasure, our privilege to be joined by Joanne Harris. How are you today, Joanne?
I'm great, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. And over to you, Laura. This is Forbidden Planet's book by Laura Dodd.
Hello, hello. We're so privileged today to be in Joanne's shed as well, the place where all the magic happens.
Right.
Yes, the magic and also the swearing.
Yes,
yes, that's what I like.
And the drinking of tea, which is really important.
Very, very important.
Of course. Do you actually have like a kettle in the shed, or do you have to like?
Oh God, yes.
You've got everything in there.
I have a kettle. I have many cups, most of them dirty. I don't have a spoon. I never, in 7 years of being in the shed, I've never remembered to bring up a teaspoon, and so I always end up using a pen in a sort of that. I think that's a teacher reflex. And I also have a lot of things that have found their way into this space. It was supposed to be rather a monastic space, but actually now it's just full of stuff, which is fine. I feel comfortable surrounded by stuff.
Yeah. Is that a fan that you've got behind you, John? Is that what?
It's a fan, yes. It's not my number one fan, but it is a fan. In fact, if I zoom around here, you'll see exactly what I mean when I say that it's full of stuff.
Oh yeah.
There's Mr. Bradbury up on the wall there.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
And here is my tea station with its burden of biscuit tins and various things. But yeah, I sort of. I've made it the place where all my favourite things end up coming to stay. And because it has heating, unlike the house, which is cavernous and old and has a very eccentric heating system, it actually has proper heating. So in winter, this is absolutely the best place to be.
It seems to me it's got a bit of a vibe of a collusion between your subconscious and on the double-deckers clubhouse, if you recall that.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because I always wanted the double-deckers clubhouse. As a child, I was obsessed with the idea of having the double-deckers clubhouse and being in a gang, because I was a very solitary child, and you know, the idea of having friends and a clubhouse, you know, that was amazing. So I was brought up on dreams of this, and and I was constantly making dens for myself as a child.
Yeah, right.
I ran away actually from school when I was 5.
Oh, interesting.
In my first week of school, I realised that actually I didn't like school, and I was going to be expected to go there for years and years. And so I ran away, took some food, some of my toys, my penknife, made a den, and was found at 8 o'clock that night by the local policeman half a mile away, just about to make a fire. That is possibly the most me thing that has ever happened to me in the whole of my life. And it sort of determined everything that I was going to be after that.
Yeah. And how funny, after that initial escape, that you should then go on to become a teacher.
Yes. Oh, yes. I always think that, you know, children who have been a problem at school always make by far the best teachers, because they know how to deal with children who are a problem at school.
Yeah.
I was a kind of quiet problem, but I was a problem nevertheless. I was a subversive. Later in secondary school, I specialised in strange and ingenious practical jokes, which nobody understood.
Can you give us a flavour of any of those?
Okay. I'll give you a flavour of one of them. On a shooting range in France, I won a stuffed frog. I didn't know what to do with it, so I took it to school and made it the basis of a practical joke. And I had a Latin teacher called Miss Smith, who was delightful, but who was also quite easy to wind up, because she could only whisper. She had a very whispering voice and couldn't raise it above a whisper for some reason, she was also very old. Okay, this doesn't excuse me at all, full disclosure. We also had a blackboard that had a hollow space behind it, because it would go round and round. You could pull it. It was an old-fashioned blackboard. And so behind the blackboard, I placed the frog. And then I also drilled into the wall various little plugs and hooks and round the skirting board, so that basically I could put a thread there. So that when I pulled the thread from under my desk, which were these lidded desks, the frog would pop up from behind the blackboard. And so during the lesson, which she used to stand in front of the blackboard and address the class. From time to time, the frog would just pop up behind her and the class would go wild, and then the frog would disappear again. And the frog would pop up again. And it worked really well for about half an hour, until finally she whipped round and saw this wretched frog and followed the thread to my desk and found out who was responsible. This was the kind of thing I did.
I love it.
So yes, again, this is very typical of what I was like as a child.
Not just a practical joke, but an ingenious one.
Yes, indeed. At that point, she didn't even know about the long comic strip that I had written at the back of my Latin book, because she only ever looked at the front of it.
Yes, I love it.
I didn't learn much Latin, though, sadly.
Yeah. Well, Latin is tough to learn, and not as much fun as drawing comic books, as we all know.
No, the comic book was in Latin too, so
Oh, wow.
it was basically a Aeneid fan fiction.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, great. Yeah, that's a particularly rarefied channel of interest, I would say. Having read the Aeneid, so to do fan fiction for it, I think that's an inspired turn of events. As a child as well, fantastic.
I was an odd child in many ways.
Yeah, well, the truth is, the world needs as many odd people as it can get. It's a fact. And having taken those beginnings and transform them into the career you've had and have got, and to entertain the world with that stuff, I think that is a brilliant application of those tendencies. Over to you, Laura.
Yes, of course. I was just going to ask, actually, funnily enough, what was the best practical joke that someone played on you when you were a teacher? Was there something particularly evilly genius?
Nobody ever played a practical joke on me when I was a teacher.
Right.
I was apparently terrifying. Many of my ex-boys, and I say boys because I taught in a boys' school for 15 years, many of them now talk to me on Twitter, and the general opinion is that I was kind of Professor Snape. Although I do remember when I was very young, when I was very new to teaching, leaning forward over my desk to pick up a pile of books, and the shirt that I was wearing gaping open, and one of the boys going very deadpan, "Are we using our breast books, miss?" And there was a silence in the class. And then he just said, without cracking a smile, "Best books." That cracked me up. That cracked me up. I had to go into the stock cupboard to laugh.
I like that. That's good.
Although I did play practical jokes on them. I remember the first book I ever wrote, which was not chocolat, as people think, but a vampire novel called The Evil Seed. And I told my boys that it wasn't suitable for them and that they mustn't read it, which ensured that they all bought it and read it, of course. And when it came out on publication day, because this was the kind of grammar school where boys had to stand up when a teacher entered the room and greet them in some sort of ridiculous military fashion. So when I came into my form, all the boys stood up and smiled, and all of them were wearing little vampire teeth, which was just adorable.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
Yes, I thought so.
That's fantastic. Oh, to get that, but the kind of affirmation from your pupils, I mean, I think that's about as sterling endorsement as you could wish for.
So what made you start with a vampire novel? Did you have a particular interest growing up, or reading kind of Stoker and things like that? Or
Well, I wanted mostly to annoy my mother. My mother had banned me from reading anything that was remotely horror or sci-fi or anything like that as a child, and so I read all those things in secret. I mean, it didn't stop me reading them, it just made them more appealing to me. And so inevitably, as I left home, I just basically fell into this rabbit hole of reading horror fiction, and I ended up writing a vampire novel. I think we look at most of my major actions throughout my life, and most of them were basically to annoy somebody or other. So that one, that writing The Evil Seed, was mostly to annoy my mother, and writing Chocolat was to annoy a guy called I can't remember now. He was one of my agent's sub-agents, and he sent me a kind of excoriating letter saying, that I was writing the wrong thing about the wrong the wrong subjects and with the wrong people and the wrong settings. I think my agent must have sent him my manuscript to try and find out why I wasn't selling in America. And so he sent me this long letter saying what I was doing wrong. And I went through them all his points, and wrote a book that basically was designed to prove him wrong. That he said, you're writing about small communities, don't do that. You're writing about these parochial themes, don't do that. You've got all these old people in the book, don't do that, no. You've not got enough sex in the book, young people having sex, that's what we want. And just if you want to write a cookbook, but why are you writing so much about food? And so I thought, right, okay, food, parochial themes, small community, old people, no sex, let's write a book to piss off the guy. He was called Al Zuckerman. He'd written this book called How to Write the Blockbuster Novel. Yeah. And so I wrote this book, and it turned into chocolat, and it did okay, actually, in spite of all Al Zuckerman's feelings about what I was doing wrong. So that was the second person I wrote a book to annoy.
I think that's a fantastic story for a genre-defining classic like Chocolat to be, in fact, the anti-Zuckerman novel. I think
it really was.
Brilliant.
Yes. It was, and bless him, he actually contacted my agent sometime later, having completely forgotten that he'd encountered me before and he'd read my work before, and said, "Oh, I understand that you have an exciting new novelist. Would they like representation in the States?" And my agent, who was a very imperious old lady called Serafina Clark, said, "No, we have it sorted, thank you," which was one of those wonderful moments of Schadenfreude that come to you in maybe, once or twice in a lifetime. Yeah. And boy, it was good.
Of course, that must be wonderful. All of it.
Did you find it difficult at the time to be writing Chocolat because you were still teaching as well? Was it hard to kind of keep the two distinct things separate, or?
Not really. I don't think they were separate. I mean, I'd written these two other books that had been published while I was teaching, and I mean, I had what free time I had to work in, but I didn't have any deadlines to work towards because I wasn't important enough to be given deadlines. I didn't have, I didn't have a contract to fulfill. And so I could just work whenever I liked. It was very much a leisure activity. And also, I think, the thing about being a teacher is that you meet so many people and have to deal with so many different situations that I felt that it was feeding what I was doing in a lot of ways. You wouldn't think that, a boys' grammar school in Leeds would have contained any material for a book about villages in the south of France, but it did. I think inevitably I looked at the people around me, and some of them kind of segued into what I was writing. And because I'd been told by Al Zuckerman that whatever I wrote in that genre wouldn't sell anyway, I think, I did that thing whereby I didn't really believe it would ever be published. And so from time to time, there was a portrait there that was recognizable. And one particular physics master called Mr. Fry, I wrote him in there very, very recognizably with his dog. And he was a delightful character because he was a delightful man. But later, when the book had come out, and when there was a movie, and 2,000 Leeds Grammar School boys were asking me who was going to play Mr. Fry, I just realized that if I'd wanted to keep his anonymity secure, perhaps I should have changed the name of the dog. So that's something to bear in mind for all the budding writers out there. Just change the name of the dog, please. Plausible deniability, that's what it is. And then when the movie came out, of course, that became even worse, and I just stopped pretending. And so I took him to the only movie house in Leeds that would let him bring the dog. And we sat through this interminable movie, and every time his character came on, because he was a little modest guy who didn't like attention, and I would hear this stricken intake of breath, and the dog would whine, and I would think, oh God, what have I done? And at the end of the movie, he kind of toddled out into the sunlight, and I said, well, Mr. Fry, what did you think? And he looked at me and he said, oh, Mrs. Harris, they've made me so tall.
That's wonderful. That's brilliant. Jan, may I ask, when you so with all the success that you had with Chocolat and the books that followed, when you when you created Remarks, did you get any resistance? You know, did any of the people you worked with, you know, your publishers, your agent, have any issues with you taking that fantasy track?
Oh, I think my agent did.
Yeah.
My agent would have, well, you know, the thing is, agents like to make money, and you've never seen a poor agent.
Yeah.
And this agent had got, well, she was an imperious old lady of a certain kind, and she had a plan. And the plan was that I would write more books like Chocolat, and that I would also write cookbooks, and that would ensure that we both made a lot of money. And I wasn't entirely cooperative. And at first she was okay with it. And then I came up with this fantasy book. And basically she ticked me off good and proper. And she said, you know, Jan, you're going to have to watch yourself. You are either going to go swanning around like a bloody pirate doing whatever you want, or you're going to knuckle down and make us both a lot of money. So I got a new agent and went off and did exactly what I'd been told not to do.
Because who wouldn't want to swan around like a pirate? That seems to me a perfect way to live one's life. Right?
Well, you know, she was right in a lot of ways. What I was doing, and I have to say that some of the things I did later were quite possibly to annoy her. What I was doing was not advisable for somebody who wanted to become a brand and make a lot of money. But that was never what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was write the stories I wanted to write. And that has led to a certain amount of anomalous activity from me, because I'm aware that I'm not like a lot of other writers. Most other writers do one thing and they do it very well, and they create a brand and they work on that brand. And, you know, there are people like Lee Child, who I like very much.
Exactly who I was just thinking of when you said that.
I like his books. He likes mine. For a long time, we shared a publisher. And he used to get my proofs and I used to get his. And we always used to make a joke about the fact that Jack Reacher and Vianne Rocher pretty much share a name, and they're probably related. And at some point there may be some very niche fan fiction written about that creature in a chocolate shop somewhere in France. Who knows?
That would be fantastic.
But, you know, what he's done is exceptionally clever and lucrative. I couldn't have done that. I'm not that kind of person. I don't have that kind of brain. So I've written things which are just wildly divergent in the eyes of publishing that likes to put things in little boxes. And so, yeah, it does cause trouble in some ways. I mean, I so shoot me, that's how I'm made. It's, you know, I can't write what I don't want to write. And so I like writing certain things, but I don't always want to write just those things. I want to diversify. So I've written literary fiction and fantasy fiction and psychological thrillers and historical fiction and short stories and cookbooks. Well, the cookbooks were not entirely my choice, but I enjoyed them and they were fun. But yeah, it does mean that in terms of the readership, I've got a very divergent readership. There are some people who will only read the fantasy books. Fine. Some people who won't read fantasy at all, but are happy to read the books set in France, which in my opinion are kind of fantasy, but they're within the realms of what literary fiction allows. And so given the sort of readers that are able to suspend disbelief and go, yes, this is a metaphor, this is a psychological way of expressing something, okay, they will buy that and they won't read it as fantasy. Also fine. I have a small but vociferous group of fans who have only read my Doctor Who book and who would really love me to write another one. And in a way, I love them most of all because they're so passionate. But yeah, I mean, and there are some people who will read every word I've ever written because it's me, and they won't like it all. And some of them will tell me, but they are just interested in what I do next. And again, I'm very fond of these people because they have understood me. They've understood that, you know, I am taking them for a very rambling walk through the woods, and we have no idea what we'll meet. We could meet a talking tiger. We could just meet a chocolate salesman. You know, who knows?
It's funny that you should mention Doctor Who, because one of the things that our sister company, Titan Comics, does is produce all of the Doctor Who comics around the world. And so that's specific, that the specific nature of Doctor Who fans is something that we're very familiar with.
Yes, absolutely, which was why it took me as long to write a novella for Doctor Who as it does for me to write a whole novel, because I had this weight of expectation. I was thinking, oh God, I'm going to fluff this. I'm going to get something awfully wrong. Actually, the BBC are very picky about writing for Doctor Who anyway, and they said, oh well, you'll probably have to do many rewrites for this story, so get it in early, because there'll be things you get wrong. And so I had a good old think about which Doctor I was going to write about and exactly when it was going to be set, and I pinged it out to them, and I'm very proud of the fact that I made one mistake. It was one passing reference, The Lost Moon of Poosh, where I mentioned that the Doctor might have been there, and apparently in something or other, some minor piece of audio work, it is specifically cited that the Doctor has never been to the Lost Moon of Poosh, and so I changed the place, and that was fine.
I mean,
the rest of it, I remembered it well enough to do it, and I'm quite proud of that. I love Doctor Who.
One amendment. I'm very familiar with the rigours of the Doctor Who Pantheon and what you can and can't do. So for just one tweak, I think that is amazing.
I did do it as a sort of bubble adventure, because much as I would have loved to have slotted that story in to a more active kind of storyline, because I wanted to write about my Doctor, the third Doctor, and so much has been written and developed around that. I just saw one little moment between the end of Planet of the Spiders and when he emerges from the TARDIS to regenerate, and I thought, okay, that's it, that's my bubble. And so I popped in a story there in a bubble where the Doctor is already aware that he's dying, and I did a rather sad little story which made grown fans weep, which delighted me. There may have been a bit of a weeping from me as well at one point, but yes, I was very happy to do that, and yeah, I wouldn't be at all unhappy to do another, although I think it would stress me enormously to find another bubble.
Yeah, but I guess if there's anywhere to find a bubble, it is the Doctor Who universe.
Absolutely.
So I think it'd be wonderful. I mean, I think it'd be wonderful for you to do that again. But I think it really was a great achievement. And talking of great pop culture heroes, what drew you to Loki and your particular take on the Norse mythology?
A lot of people came to Norse myths through Marvel Comics. I wasn't allowed to read comics as a child. I never read any comics. I used to go to the dump and read comics there, but they were never kind of Marvel comics. They were only things like the Beano and the Dandy, and so I was completely unaware that there were Norse myth comics. So I came to it by reading myths, retellings of myths from the library. And we had a rather aggressive librarian in Barnsley Library who would not let me into the adult section. And in the children's section, which was basically a shelf, there was this one book of Norse myths, which I loved so much that I kept taking it out over and over and over again. And I had encyclopedic recollection of every word in it. It was pretty good. It was by a lady called Dorothy Horsforth, and it was illustrated, and there was this little glossary of terms at the back. And because I was so interested in this, the librarian finally relented and said that I could go into the adult library and get out one book a month, as long as it was a suitable book that she thought that I would understand. And so it meant that on Saturdays when my parents went shopping, they would drop me off at the library, and I would speed read anything that I thought that I wouldn't be able to get out. And then I would grab the biggest mythology book I could find, because mythology for some reason was okay. It was, my mother approved of it because she felt that it was educational. And the librarian thought that it was okay because she knew that I was really interested and that I knew a lot about it. And so I read pretty much every translation of every Norse myth there is. I liked other mythologies too, but Norse myths were particularly appealing, I think partly because the characters were so great. They were so well drawn. They were so immediate, impactful, lively characters. And actually, because in a sort of counterintuitive way, because the actual body of the myths is relatively short compared to the oodles of stuff we know about the Greeks and the Romans, it allowed opportunities to invent new things. And even at 7, I was writing Norse god fan fiction, which is effectively exactly what Gospel of Loki is. It's exactly what Rune Marks is. I remember deciding at a very young age that it was completely unfair that all these great characters had to die at the end of the book and they had to be brought back somehow. And so all of my considerable imagination was geared to finding a way to bring them back, which is what I did eventually.
I think something you touched upon, which I think is so true, is that the Norse myths are just so full of life. Those characters are so full-blooded, compared absolutely to the way it plays with the Greek myths and the Greek gods. It's all very different. There's so much life in the kind of relatively brief pages of the Norse myths.
There is, and there's a lot of humour too. And I think as a child, I was very drawn to the humour, to the fact that these gods who have these amazing powers are also deeply petty, and some of them are quite stupid, and some of them are just mean and also very funny. And there was that, and I wanted, when I wrote Gospel of Loki and initially when I'd written Rune Marks and Runelight, what I wanted to do was bring that out again, because I found that there were a lot of people who treated those myths in a kind of heroic way. I think this is where the Victorians tend to put their influence into different mythologies, and they sort of assimilated mythologies and then tried to rewrite them in the heroic tone. And when we look at the first translations, of course, when you look at Snorri, he is using this heroic tone, but he's a Christian. He is not somebody who actually believes in these myths, and so he's already writing fan fiction of his own, and he's given it a voice. And I thought, okay, this is the voice of academia. I want to give my stories back to the people, and so I want to give them back to this funny, subversive, just lively tone that you can tell even from Snorri, who occasionally departs from his kind of oratory to come up with something that he's heard and he's bringing back on the page. I just wanted that voice to be there all the time, and Loki's voice, which you don't hear in the myths very much at all. You hear reported speech, and then you've got Lokazenna, which is the one passage where Loki really lets rip, and this is where Loki gets drunk, gate crashes a party where all the gods are, and just insults every one of them in such a cruel and forensic way that every person there goes away wanting Loki's head. And to Thor he says, "You're really stupid and you lost your hammer." And to Frey he said, "You gave your sword up for a girl. That's going to help you at Ragnarok, isn't it, mate?" And to Freya he said, the goddess of beauty and everything that's refined, he says, "You slept with your brother, and by the way, you fart in bed," which is just, he just knows what to say to wind people up. And I thought, why do we not hear this voice more often? So I thought, I know, I'll borrow that. And so I wrote a whole book in it. And it annoyed a lot of people, because it annoyed the people who felt that I was messing with canon, which is absurd when we're talking about an oral tradition that no longer exists. But it also upset people who felt that myths ought to have dignity and gravitas, and I'd stripped all that out, and I'd filled it with stupid anachronisms and jokes and breaking the fourth wall, and all of that was on purpose, and you either liked it or you didn't.
They are my particular faves, I have to say. I have such a soft spot for the Loki.
But I did too. I mean, he's everybody's favourite character. He always was. Because he is the one that makes everything happen.
Yeah.
Without Loki, it would just be a story about gods living together on a mountain and really not much happening. Loki is the one who makes things happen. He is the one that catalyzes story all the time. And I always thought he got a bad press. I always thought, there is something deeply unkind in expecting this chaotic character to behave any differently to the way he behaves. So given that Odin is supposed to know the future, why didn't he stop him?
Yeah.
And to me, Loki is, and he's got, I wrote him a very teenage voice because to me, that's what he is. He's a sort of, he's one of those slightly unruly pupils that I used to have who was smart, a bit too smart, but also chaotic. And who, when something awful had happened, would just go, well, you should have stopped me.
Yeah, and we've all known
he's also
people
not
like that.
unlike the way I was at that age too, which made it quite easy to access that voice.
I'm glad you said that because I'm just about to make the same point. It's so interesting to me because I'm a lifelong Marvel fan, but my entry into the Norse myths was actually two-pronged. It was the Roger Lancelin Green retellings of myth from when I was a kid, which I still have a lot of fondness for.
Yeah, me too.
And and they're really well drawn and whatnot. And I thought you might have also been a fan. And also, my mum and dad had the Pers Cyclopedia, which had quite a sort of bloodless retelling of all of the Greek myths and Norse myths, but in tremendous detail. But I think, having been schooled in those iterations of the Norse myths, I think what you produced absolutely pulses with that life that we were talking about, and it's just, I think it's a truly great achievement. It's so exciting to read, as Laura said, I know that Laura's favorite. They're also my favourites among your work, and I like everything you've done. But it's so much fun what you've done with the Norse myths. I think you really achieved something great.
Well, I'm really glad to hear it because I really enjoy writing those voices, and I'm totally doing another one. And this time, the one that I'm working on at the moment, which will take a while, because I wanted to tie in with my rune books, which are also all about Loki, but which are much more in a kind of a fluid fantasy setting and which are much less close to the myths, because actually the myths is just a little bit of Loki's backstory. Given that, and I don't have to worry about spoilers here because, 1,000 years have gone by. Given that everybody dies at the end of Loki's story, including Loki, I had to bring him back from the dead, bring everybody else back from the dead, rebuild Asgard, which was a challenge, but I managed it. And now I've kind of got my Lego Asgard together and all my figures in place, and now I'm getting ready to play with them. And so I've kind of created a story around that scenario, which kind of will start at the end of Runelight. And my next plan, if it comes off, is I'm taking my gods to America.
Fantastic.
So I'm getting them to meet the Aztecs and their gods. Because
that is a great idea.
Very interesting thing to do. And also, of course, there is the saga of the air dwellers, which suggests that that's exactly what happened. Which I'm finding very interesting. So I'm looking at ways of getting my gods over there to South America. And I also have a theory, which many people will dislike me for, because there is a group of sort of right-wing thinking which believes that, the Norse gods took their mythology to South America, which makes no damn sense because South America had its mythology long before that. I think it's the other way around. I think actually they brought, because if we look at the myths of the South American Pantheon, there are some really interesting things there. They believe in a world tree. It's not an ash, it's a saber tree, but it's the same principle. They have a universe of 9 worlds, for heaven's sake, and they have a god with a hammer. How wonderful is that for somebody who enjoys challenging mythologies? And so, I'm going to get my gods to meet some of their counterparts over there, and shenanigans may ensue.
I can't wait. When do you think we will see that, Joanne?
I have no idea. I haven't even told the publishers about this one yet.
and could you just close out with us and take us through some of the things you are working on at the moment?
Well, I'm working on that.
What's going to be released?
But I have the things that you are likely to see sooner.
Yeah.
I'm working on a psychological thriller called A Narrow Door, which is in the same world as my others, Gentlemen and Players, different class. It's set around a school. It's another murder mystery without actually having a detective in it. It has an older woman at its heart as its villain, which kind of pleases me because there are not very many villain parts for women past supervillain age. So there's that. I've also got my book of 100 short stories, Honeycomb, where Charles Vess has been illustrating that, and these are the stories that I wrote on Twitter. And yes, I'll be fleshing out my other Loki book, which will come out at whatever time my publishers decide, if they decide to publish it at all. You never know with publishers.
you never do. Look, Laura, have you got any closing questions for Joanne?
Yeah, I'm always kind of intrigued as to if you had to tell people about a very underrated book that you think they should read and something that you've really loved, what would you recommend?
Well, until recently, I've been recommending Shirley Jackson. She's been having a bit of a moment now, so I think she is sort of coming more to the fore. But I've always said to people, read Shirley Jackson, and I've always been slightly dismayed that they haven't read her, or that all that they've read is The Lottery. I think We've Always Lived in the Castle is wonderful. Actually, The Haunting of Hill House is wonderful, far more wonderful than the TV show was, and much stranger and more subversive. So I'm still recommending Shirley Jackson to people, and obviously people in the know will think what people don't read her, but actually a lot of the people I encounter still haven't come across her, which is rather sad. I'm also recommending, her short stories are fabulous, but the short stories of Dorothy Parker are wonderful, and people aren't reading them anymore, which
couldn't
I think
agree
is
more.
Extremely sad, because they're incredibly good.
They're great.
And I think people just forget that they exist. And when I remind them, they go, oh, yeah, she was somebody, wasn't she? And they go off and read them, and they go, wow, this is amazing.
She is mind-blowingly good, and it's such energy to her writing. Yeah,
absolutely,
such a great voice. Yeah, well said. I think she's such a great choice. So this has been Forbidden Planet Talks to Joanne Harris. John, thank you very much for joining us today. That's been a really wonderful chat. Really thanks for sharing all that information with us. I think probably for me, the most surprising thing that came out during that entire chat is the fact that you're such good friends with Lee Child, which I didn't see coming. And all the books, all the great books of Joanne's that we've been talking about, you'll be able to order from the links attached to this video. So thanks for joining us today, Joanne, and we're looking forward to getting to Orfea, your new book, and please come back and join us again.
I'd love to.
We'd love to get into whatever you're releasing next. We'd love to chat about that as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks so much. Take care.